right. Hi, my name's Piper. We're going to take a look at what makes the happiest countries. So a little bit about the data. This comes from the World Happiness Report published by the United Nations, and it attempts to research and study what aspects of life make us happy. There are 193 countries that exist in the world, and the data contains 156 countries, or about 80% of all countries. The data also contains a score for their overall happiness, and then there are several variables that help predict that, and that is the GDP, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom of choice, generosity, and perceptions of corruption, and finally, the country type. There are two types. There is the collectivistic and individualistic. And individualistic countries are typically countries that stress the needs of the individual over the needs of the group as a whole. And then collectivistic is the opposite, where they tend to emphasize the goals of the whole group and interconnectedness between the people and doing what's best for the whole rather than the individual. In the data that we have 27 individualistic countries out of the 156 countries, so that's about 17%, meaning there's a 83% collectivistic countries. When we continue to look at the data, we can see that the scores for happiness are fairly evenly distributed. We got a normal bell curve. And when I go to continue to look at the histogram of the variables, first we have GDP, social support, and the healthy life expectancy. You can see that social support is skewed to the right a little bit. That is shown later. I'm going to keep going, look at the other variables because we have freedom of choice, generosity, and the perceptions of corruption, which is also skewed. When we look at the box plots, we can see that the skewness is due to the outliers. You can see that social support has a few outliers at the bottom, while generosity has a few at the top, and perceptions of corruption has very many outliers on the top of its box plot. We keep going to look at the data. You can see all of the data working against each other here. I colored the data for collectivistic countries are blue, while individualistic countries are orange, and you can see that individualistic countries generally score higher than collectivistic countries, which I found interesting because you would assume that there would be more collectivistic countries within the top 10 because there's a higher frequency of them. So statistically speaking, there should be more of them, but all of the individualistic countries score much higher. And then I did this one more time. We're just looking at it with a different color variation. This time the colors correspond with the score. A lighter color like those yellows are a lower score, while the darker colors are a higher score. And you can see how pretty much every variable helps predict that score there. But I did want to try to build a better predictor model. So at first I tried reducing the model, and every time I reduced the model, it didn't improve much. I finally got a model that was a little bit better than the original, but I decided to keep the original that had all of the variables because I felt like it better interpreted the score rather than having less variables. So here are the residuals and the normal QQ plots for the original linear model. And I also decided to look at the marginal model plots. And from here, I decided that I was going to try to transform the generosity and perceptions of corruption to better fit the model. However, after exploring different models, I decided to just remove perceptions of corruption altogether because it had so many outliers that it was hard to predict. And I just kept overfitting the model. So in the end, I ended up transforming generosity and removing perceptions of corruption. So right here, we're looking at a comparison of both the models, the original vanilla model next to the transformed model that I created. You can see that the residuals are a little bit smaller. All of my variables are within machine accuracy, and my R squared also improved. I was pretty happy with this model. I do believe everything improved a little bit. You can see here with the marginal model plots that there are some skewness with the lines where there's less data. But after looking at all of my data, I realized that 156 countries was a rather small data set. And I feel if there was more data that we could build a better predictor model. However, this is the one we ended up with in the end, and I'm not terribly upset with an R squared of 0.8. That's very good for data. And I also wanted to take one final look at the country type, just because individualistic countries just scored significantly higher than the collectivistic countries, and I wanted to know why that was. I don't want to determine causation from correlation, but collectivistic countries do what is best for the whole rather than the individual. And I feel as when individuals are able to focus on their happiness and reach a level of happiness where they can return that happiness, they're able to return happiness in the forms of higher executive thinking, better jobs, higher pay, better healthcare. They're able to do things that create a better society and therefore end up with a happier country. I can't prove that, but it's just a thought, and I do think that it's worth exploring why these countries are constantly scoring within the top 10 countries. Um, and then just final thoughts. I decided to remove perceptions of corruption due to the many outliers and transform generosity. I did see small changes within the marginal model plots, and you could see smaller residuals, the larger R squared, the variables being within machine accuracy. And like I said before, I do believe I would see bigger changes if I had a larger data set. I thought that this was a large, good data set when we began the class, and now looking at other presentations, I have a rather small data set. I also believe that creating a predictive model for happiness isn't going to be a perfect model, but you can generally decide how happy a country is going to be based on all of these variables of GDP, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom of choice, and generosity, and especially by the type of country that it is. And I do think that this data is worth exploring and worth continue collecting because happiness is important. I think that's a goal most of us have in life. An economist named John F. Halliwell once said, if it's really important, then it needs to be measured, and if it's going to be taken seriously by people. And since I think it's important, I think we should continue to study it and look at these countries and ask ourselves why they're happier and try to implement that in our own countries.